mentally?
Both, virtually and mentally. Oh, and we're live. I was just centering myself.
You look centered, Tom.
I do.
Yes. We all need to find that centering. I've kind of had a really busy week, so it's nice to center, not only virtually, but mentally.
Yeah. I don't do that touchy-feely stuff. I was just centering myself virtually. So. Mentally, I don't know. Anyway, Erica, it's probably nice for you to have a day off.
Yep.
Or did you guide part of the day today?
Oh, no, not today. No. So I got to sleep in a little bit.
How many days a week are you guiding now?
Oh, I'm still keeping up full-time work for consulting. And so whenever, I get a request or when they need me, pretty much. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Busy.
Yeah, very busy.
Busy. Well, we have Warren from New Zealand here. Wow.
Nice.
And Ed from Florida.
Nice.
And SPC Charlottetown from PEI Canada. Wow, we got an international audience today. And Mike and Dave.
That's great.
And the Orvis Company. Got the Orvis Company here. Nice. So Eric and I are going to talk about fly lines today. And fly lines are a very confusing topic.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly just in the floating lines. I remember not too many years ago, maybe 5 years ago, Perk Perkins, who at the time was the CEO and president and CEO of Orvis, his son Simon is now the CEO, but Perk came to a couple of us one day, and Perk was always very involved in the products, right? I mean, he would approve the products, he tested them, he was always super involved with the products. He would come to us and say, which damn floating line should I get? I am so confused. So if he was confused, mm-hmm. I imagine that a lot of other people are confused.
Yeah, I still am confused and I'm still learning. So there seems like once I think I get something, then there's something else.
No, you were going to do all the explling today, Eric.
Yeah. So
just going to listen.
That's the end of our show today.
Well, let's start from the very beginning and talk about fly line sizes. So fly lines come in 2 through 12, 1 through 12. I guess there's a 0 weight that exists somewhere, and actually they get into 14s. But we those are very specialized sailfish tuna lines. But 2 through 12 is kind of the basic lines, and they're weighted. There are standards for the first 30 feet of any given fly line, and it should weigh between X and X grains. And those standards were established back in the 1960s. And so people pretty much follow those standards. And it's important to match a fly line to a fly rod, because the fly line is what bends the rod. Mm-hmm. And, you can cast with your hands without a fly rod. You have to put a ton of effort into it, and you have to double haul. But Lefty Cray used to be able to throw a whole fly line without a fly rod with his hands. You can throw a fly line with a broomstick and make it go out there. However, fly rods make it a lot easier. They build up energy. They bend and flex in a particular way. And that energy is like a coiled spring. And when you make that back cast or that forward cast, the coiled spring unloads and throws a line out there. So fly lines have to have weight, and they have to have a certain amount of weight. Mm-hmm. We get around the fact that they're heavy and they land on the water pretty hard by using a leader. And we've talked about leaders here before. But people talk about, do I really need, I just got I got a question from podcast the other day from a young guy who said, I've got a good 7-weight line and a 5-weight rod and a 7-weight rod. Can I use that 7-weight line on my 5-weight? And you get this question all the time. Can I overline? In other words, can I put a heavier line on my rod? And can I underline a rod?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is yes, you can if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen is that if you underline a rod, let's say you take your 5-weight standard trout rod and you put a 3-weight line on it.
Mm-hmm.
You can cast that 3-weight line, but you are going to have to force it a lot harder. You're going to have to push that rod a lot harder to make the rod bend in order to throw that 3-weight line out there efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
At the other end of the scale, if you take that 5-weight rod and you put a 7-weight on it, it's going to cast kind of nice. It'll slow the action of the rod down. The rod will bend a lot more when you cast it. It makes roll casting really easy, but you won't get much distance because that 5-weight won't be able to hold that 7-weight in the air. In fact, if you tried to really overline a rod and make a long cast, some rods could even break because they're just flexing beyond the way they normally are. So yes, you can overline a rod. If you're going to not follow the manufacturer's designation, it's probably better to overline a rod by 1 line size. That doesn't hurt most rods, and it can sometimes even make certain rods cast a little bit easier because they bend more. A lot of times in fishing schools, the instructors, if someone is having trouble with their fly casting, they'll overline a rod because it helps them feel the rod bend a little bit more. So anyway, yes, you can do that. It's not going to be optimal. I mean, fly rod manufacturers make their rods for a particular line size, and they design them for a particular line size. But if you're casting really short line most of the time, like 20 feet, then you can overline the rod. If you're always casting over 70 feet, I don't know why you would. You can underline it, but it's probably best not to underline a rod. It's just not going to perform very well.
You see. Okay, cool.
So that is kind of the standard. Now, Ed makes a good point. Some lines are rated for a certain grain weight, but many lines are heavier than rated. Yeah. Ed, it comes from the fact that from the really super stiff rod craze, a lot of fly rods are very, very stiff, and to get them to perform properly for your average angler, you have to kind of have an overweighted line. So there are lines you'll see them called power tapers. I don't know what some of the other ones are, but often those are a half size to sometimes even a full size heavier than their number designation, which is kind of dumb. But if people are going to make those super stiff rods, you need to bring out the action, and you need to have a heavier line. So, some lines are half size bigger. What's called a power taper is usually a half size bigger, and they can be an advantage in throwing big flies and in the wind and things like that. But people wig out over the exact taper of their fly lines. And they want to know exactly what the taper is on a fly line. Honestly, I don't pay much attention to it. People say, "Oh, I love this taper. I love the superfine taper. I love the trout taper." Blah blah blah. They're not that much different. They're really not that much. Maybe I'm not good enough to appreciate the subtleties in the different tapers.
Yeah.
But
You're not going to compete in the GoPro games casting next year?
nope. I'm not going to compete in anything.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
And then, there's double tapers and the two basic tapers are double tapers and weight forward. Weight forward has a skinny front end, and then it gets thicker up to about 35 feet. And then it gets really skinny and level after that, for the most part, on the average. And a double taper gets skinny just like a weight forward. It starts to taper and get thicker, and then it stays thicker in the middle until the other end when it tapers down at a mirror image. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that double taper and weight forward lines in a standard line from manufacturer are exactly the same for the first 30 feet. They're exactly the same taper. And so why the difference?
Yeah.
Well, a double taper, because it has that thicker midsection, more mass, is a little bit easier to mend line because you have more mass to lift up when you're repositioning the line. And a double taper will also make long roll casts better because you've got that mass to make a roll cast. On the other hand, weight forward lines are probably better for distance because you load the rod at 35 feet and then you shoot the rest of the line. And that skinny, what's called running line, is able to shoot through the guides easier and cut through the wind better. So those are the two basic differences. But, I hear people say all the time, oh, I love double taper for small stream fishing, much better than weight forward. Well, it doesn't matter because you're never casting over 30 feet, and a weight forward and double taper are going to be exactly the same. So,
yeah, I never knew that about the first 30 feet, but that makes sense. And yeah, interesting. Yeah, I do a lot of kind of like big water, so I'm trying to get across the stream. So I think that mend and that double taper could really be helpful in that. So anyway, just kind of thinking about scenarios of good and pros and cons of each line.
And then, you get complicated. There's something called a long belly weight forward, which isn't quite as skinny after that first 35 feet. It starts to taper a little bit less, and that allows you to mend easier, up to 50, 60 feet. So,
Nice.
but there are so many different kinds of floating lines out there. Most people are going to be happiest with a standard weight forward. And if you're throwing big flies, then probably one of those power tapers. You're throwing streamers and indicated rigs and stuff like that. Probably a power taper is better, but don't agonize too much over the different fly lines. You can worry about that later when you get into it and you have a specialized situation. But standard weight forward is fine. Now, double taper is economical because if the front end gets worn out or it gets cracked or something, you can theoretically take the line off the reel, switch it around, and use the other end of it. Problem is that back end has been stored on a reel for a couple of years in a very tight, over a very small circumference, and it takes a lot to get the kinks out of it because it's kinked up underneath the reel. But you can do that, so it's a little more economical. Cool. And then how long does a fly line last? I get that question a lot. And, it's like, how long will a pair of tires last on your car? It depends on how much you drive and your driving habits. I would say that most modern fly lines, you should be able to get 4 or 5 years out of them. Before they get too worn out. And what does a worn out fly line look like? Well, it gets cracks in it. It gets cracks in the coating. And once you get a crack in the coating of the line, there's no fixing it. you can't put glue in it. It's just, it's done.
Yeah.
It's done for. The things that prematurely age fly lines are stripping your line on gravel when you're fishing from the shore, and then stepping on your line with your metal cleats or something. That wears out a fly line. Getting insect repellent on your fly line, that's a no-no. You got to be very careful with insect repellent on your fly line. And then something I find, sometimes you'll get the leader will actually tie a knot around the fly line. You get a big tangle. You've probably seen that guiding, and the skinny leader actually wraps around the fly line, and sometimes that knot comes tight.
Yep.
If you ever see that, if you ever see your leader wrapped around your fly line, be very, very careful, and try to cut that leader away. Don't try to tighten it, because even a piece of 5X in a tight knot can cut through a fly line, and then your fly line's pretty much ruined.
Yeah, that sounds rough.
Yeah, so you want to be careful.
Yeah. What about heat exposure? I notice sometimes I will leave my rod in the car, or whatnot. So does that affect any damage or have any impact?
As long as your car doesn't get above 450 degrees, you're safe.
Okay, good.
That's what the scientists at Scientific Anglers tell me, that it's got to get to 450 degrees before a fly line is going to start to melt. So I think you're safe. Yeah. You shouldn't have to worry. Modern fly lines are pretty much don't have to worry about them. Sun doesn't hurt them very much. I wouldn't leave a fly line in the sun for 6 months, because I have done it, and they do get bleached and ruined. Yeah. But heat doesn't bother them. No, cold doesn't bother them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I just see a question which I was just going to ask. Will stretch the line I guess so. I was trying to throw some streamers the other day, and I kept getting caught in the trees, and so I kept having to stretch it just to try to get it out of there. Does that also have any impact on damaging your line?
No, it shouldn't. In fact, a lot of people recommend that you stretch the line gently before you fish to take the kinks out of it. It'll cast and shoot better. So cool. Stretching the line is a good idea. No, it won't really hurt it.
Great.
They're elastic. They're designed to be stretched.
Yeah, cool.
When you catch a big fish, you're going to stretch it too.
It's true. Cool.
I wanted to ask, I see a question here. I wanted to ask of a 5-weight intermediate line, and I want to use a foam-eyed damsel. Don't want to get banned. It sometimes holds the line up in the lake. Should I attach split shot or what else? Don't put split shot on your fly line, Mike. You can put split shot on your leader, sure, but don't ever put split shot on your fly line. That will ruin it. If you have a fly line, whether it's intermediate or a floating line, and you want to get your flies down deeper, heavy current or something, one of the best things to use is what's called a sinking poly leader. They come in sinking and extra fast sinking. They're basically a loop section of sinking line that you can loop to the end of your fly line, and really makes a very adequate sink tip line out of a floating line. And honestly, folks, 95% of the trout fishing that you do, floating line is all you need. Unless you're fishing in lakes. If you're fishing in lakes, then you're going to need at least 3 different lines to be effective. You're going to need a floater, intermediate, and a sinking line. And if you're fishing in salt water, you're going to want at least 2, a floater and a sinking line. Unless you're just fishing flats. If you're fishing shallow water in salt water, then like for bonefish, all you ever need is a floating line. But if you're going offshore at all, or you're fishing in currents, deeper current, then a sinking line is going to help.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get away with trout fishing. I mean, do you ever use a sinking line? Trout fishing?
When I first started fishing, yeah, it was a lot of streamer fishing I was doing, and but I just got a sinking leader because I wasn't throwing that far off, and I just needed that small part. I think it's 7 foot of line out to getting my streamer down really quick. So that's all I use right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those poly leaders are great.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what is preferred line, intermediate or floating line? Well, what's preferred, it depends on what you're doing, Dave. For all around, I would get a floating line. It'll do most everything. And if you need to get deeper, you can always put on a longer leader and a heavier fly. Intermediates are sometimes handy if you want to retrieve a fly a little bit, say a foot underwater, or if you're casting in the surf and you want to get that line below the waves, an intermediate line can help. Mm-hmm. But I think I would say overall, the preferred line would be a floating line. Yeah. They're easier to cast too. Easier to pick up and cast. Roger Bird. Hello, Roger Bird.
Hey, Roger.
Irma and I were fishing last week and the ends of our lines were sinking. The guide recommended cleaning due to contaminants. Your thoughts? Yep. Lines pick up dirt, algae, and they need to be cleaned, particularly if they are not floating. The best way to clean them is warm water and soap. Strip them in the sink or a bucket, a little warm water and soap. Run them through a piece of paper towel or a soft cloth with some pressure on it to remove that stuff on the outside, and then rinse them again, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Some people clean their fly lines, wash their fly lines after every fishing trip. Other people, like me, do it like once a year. I find that the modern fly lines are so good as far as floating and lubrication is concerned that you don't need to. But if you fish in like tailwaters with a lot of algae in them, yeah, you need to clean them more often. Don't put junk on your fly line. Don't put Armor All, or some people use Armor All, which lasts for about a dozen casts and then it attracts more dirt. They sell line cleaners and line slickeners, and most people don't recommend that you use any kind of potion on your fly line.
Yeah, I've used kind of like a wipe. I've noticed I've found kind of like wiping it down. And I've noticed that when the wipe kind of comes off, it's really black. And then I've just noticed a significant difference in the casting. It's almost kind of like a new line once you clean it up. So yeah, I've started to clean my lines probably twice a year, Tom. So I got one up on you.
Oh, good for you, Erica. Good for you. Now, is there anything on the wipe? Is there like alcohol or anything on it?
I'm actually not sure what's I should probably look into that a little bit more, but no, it seems pretty good, and I haven't had any issues. I've been doing it for the last few years, so kind of seems to maintain it pretty well.
Yeah, I don't think alcohol will hurt a fly line. I'm not absolutely sure about that, but I know some solvents will. The solvents and insect repellent for sure can take the coating off a fly line. Yeah, it's probably some sunscreens as well, so you need to be careful there.
But I like just the soap and water. I think that's just a basic, nice little, have a nice little evening and clean your fly line.
Here's a good one. Difference between cold water and warm water. Yeah, cold water and warm water lines are just. There's a little bit difference in the coating, but more difference in the core of the line. So cold water lines, which would be lines used up to maybe 65 degrees or so, have a dacron or a braided core. and they're a little bit limper in colder water. And these lines, if you've got them on the deck of a boat and it's 95 degrees, they can get a little sticky. So in that case, if you're going tropical fishing, is really the only time you need a warm water line is in tropical fishing. And it doesn't have to be saltwater. It could be largemouth bass or, peacock bass in the jungle or something like that. They have a monofilament core and a little bit harder coating, so they don't get as soft when it gets super, super hot. But there's no difference. Some people call warm water lines saltwater lines. Well, any fly line will work in saltwater or freshwater. There's no special coating that goes on a line that's used in saltwater. It's just mainly that saltwater environments are often tropical, and sometimes those cold water lines don't work quite as well because they get sticky. All trout lines are cold water lines.
Mm-hmm.
Mark asked, do you recommend a plasticizer? I'm not sure what you mean, Mark. I don't recommend putting a plasticizer on your line. The lines themselves have plasticizer incorporated in the coating. So, but I wouldn't recommend you put an extra plasticizer on them. No.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Was going to buy some depth charge line. Does it come in specific 12 weight? Store said it came in a range for 11, 12. Yeah, depth charge lines, Bill, are weighted in grains, but honestly, I gauge my depth charge when I pick a depth charge more by the grain weight, because that's going to determine the sink rate. Depth charge, for those of you who don't know, depth charge line is a fast sinking head with intermediate line behind it, so they're good for deep water fishing. And most of the time, you kind of lob these lines anyways. You're not going to be doing a lot of false casting with them because they're heavy. And so I would gauge the depth charge that you get for tarpon based on how deep you need to fish, instead of what is rated for your 11 or 12. And I don't know what grain you probably want, probably around 450 if you're fishing deep water for tarpon.
Can we talk about some of the budgets? I like this question by John. Is the difference between a $150 fly line and a $30 fly line worth the investment? Mostly small streams in the Sierras, but I guess I'm looking like overall budget wise, because I've heard that your line is probably the best investment you can make. But whenever you're first starting, I didn't really know much about lines to begin with. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, I don't agree that it's the most important. I guess some people would. I think it's the least important. I put a lot more value in my leader taper and my rod than I do in my fly line. And John, particularly if you're fishing a small stream where you're not looking for distance, you probably don't have much wind, and you're not shooting a lot of line. A $30 line, I don't know about 30, but $50 line might be just fine. The advantages you get with a more expensive line is they're going to last longer. They're going to shoot better. They're going to, it's going to be easier to shoot line, and they're going to float higher. And they're just going to feel better. They're just going to feel better when you're casting. But, if you're fishing small streams where you're fishing 15, 20 feet all day long with mostly the leader out, I'd get the cheap line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
If you're fishing a big river, where you're casting 50 feet to rising trout, or you're fishing nymphs long distance, then I think that a more expensive fly line is worth it, because you want that extra distance and the floating ability. and the durability. I mean, a $30 line is not going to last as long as a $150 line, all based on wear and tear and whatever. But yeah. And I think we kind of answered this one. Will definitely catch more fish with the expensive ones. No, but your fishing experience, Eric, might be a little more pleasant with the more expensive line. That's about all. You can do everything with the cheaper lines you could do with an expensive line, but it's going to be more fun. Wanting to save money on reels, I was wondering what would happen if I put a 7-8 weight line and rod with a 4 to 6 weight reel. Yeah, Marco, you can do that. You may have to, it's a matter of capacity on your reel, but you may have to strip some backing off that reel, or you may not be able to put as much backing on that 4 to 6 weight reel. But if you're fishing a situation where, how often do we need backing in trout fishing anyways? And how much do we need, 50 yards probably once every 3 seasons for me. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. Just may not be able to get as much backing on the reel, but everyone has way more backing than they need on their reels. Does any floating line actually stay perfectly straight on the water? Yeah, Mike, you're always going to have a little wrinkle in that line because it's been stored on a reel, and even if you stretch it, don't expect it to lay perfectly straight on the water. It's going to have little kinks in it, but those are sometimes good. They can help you detect strikes, and it doesn't have to land straight as an arrow. If they bother you, bring the line in and stretch it a little bit more. See if you can get the kinks out of it. But yeah, I mean, if you have like slinky kinks in it, yeah, then you probably want to give it another stretch. But I wouldn't worry about that at all. Is it true that Orvis lines are made by scientific anglers? Yes, Ryan. Orvis actually bought Scientific Anglers a number of years ago, so it's our sister company, and they actually have made our lines for a lot longer than we own Scientific Anglers. But the Orvis lines are slightly different. The tapers are sometimes slightly different. We work with the product developers and scientists at Scientific Anglers, and we tell them what we want, but they're quite similar. The quality is going to be the same, and the coatings are the same, but the tapers and colors and exact designations are sometimes a little bit different. But yes, Orvis lines are made by Scientific Anglers. All right. Are there any benefits or downsides to using a bass line in trout conditions? Well, bass lines, what's called a bass line, is usually a heavier taper. It's usually kind of front loaded. There's more weight up towards the front of that line. It doesn't have such a long, skinny piece because you don't need delicacy for bass fishing, and you're often throwing very heavy wind-resistant flies for bass. So that front loading of the weight in the line helps you drive those bugs out there. So there aren't really any. I don't think there's any benefits to using a bass line unless you are fishing big streamers for trout, and then bass line would be just fine. Probably if you're fishing a really large indicator, bass line might be beneficial. The disadvantage to using a heavy bass line in trout situations is that they land heavier, they land harder. So if the water's clear and the fish is spooky, you might risk scaring the fish with your fly line landing. Of course, you can get around that by using a longer leader, so keeping that fly line further away from the fish. But yeah, you can use a bass line for trout.
Mm-hmm.
Not ideal, but
I've never really been bass fishing. So is that a different line, or would you still use floating line for bass, or can you use floating line for bass?
I just use my standard like 7 or 8 floating line that I use for bonefish for bass. I use the same line, or pike, bass, carp, whatever. I use the same line. It's just a heavier, it's a bigger rod because the flies are bigger and more air resistant. In the case of carp, the flies aren't necessarily bigger, but the fish are bigger. So you need a little muscle in there sometimes to get a carp close to the boat or close to you. But yeah, I use the same line. I don't use a specialized bass line. If I were going to fish bass all the time, I might get a specialized bass line, but I don't find I need one.
I see.
Yeah, I use the same line for bass and pike and freshwater as I do for bonefish and striped bass and saltwater. Same floating line, weight forward floating line.
Cool.
Does Orvis SA make a decent bamboo fly rod line? If yes, which one would you recommend? If not, what line would you recommend? Charles, I think the best line for bamboo rods is the superfine line. It's a little bit more delicate taper. That's what I use on my bamboo rod, and I find it's really nice. Kind of, a little thinner in diameter, a little more delicate, kind of like the old silk lines almost. So that's the line I would recommend. I think it's a really good rod for bamboo. It's also good for slower action graphite rods and fiberglass rods as well.
So I had a line where it came with the loop on it, and eventually that kind of broke off. And how long is that going to last me if I just kind of tied on some like a butt section of line on that? How long is that going to ruin the line eventually, or how long does that last?
Yeah, those loops will sometimes crack or break. It's pretty rare, but they do. Did you nail knot the leader to the fly line?
Yeah.
It'll last forever until it cracks a little bit around the edge of the nail knot, and then you just got to come up a little bit further on the fly line and tie another nail knot.
So is it kind of a myth that like water will get into it and eventually ruin it? Because I think that's what I heard, but okay.
Nah, some people put a little drop of super glue on that nail knot.
Okay.
Or some sort of waterproof flexible glue. I don't think you need to. No, and it won't hurt it, and you could just keep. That's the way we did it for many years before there were self loops. We nail knotted them on, and some people don't like the loops because they're a little bit bigger, and they're sometimes get caught in the guide. So a lot of people will cut the loop off and put a nail knot on. So yeah, it's perfectly great way of putting a leader onto a line.
Okay, great.
I have a slight nick in my Orvis tactical line. Should I replace it? Can I just repair somehow? It's about 1 year old, but I don't fish every week. In a tactical line where you're probably not casting it very far, Mike, there's not much you can do to repair it. There isn't a glue or anything that you can repair it with. But for a tactical line, I wouldn't worry about it unless it bothers you, because again, you're not casting very far with that, and you're not concerned about it floating if you're if you're, Euro nymphing, you don't have the line on the water that much. So you may be able to get away with a nick in there without having to replace it. If it was a standard 5-weight, I'd say, you better get a new line. But tactical line, depends on how you use the tactical line, but you may not need to replace it.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Rossett. Are you a loop guy or a nail knot guy? I'm a loop guy, Dave. I'm a loop guy. I did some tests. We did some tests on those loops with our Instron machine to see how strong they were.
Mm-hmm.
Those self loops on the end of the lines. And the core of the fly line broke at 33 pounds and the loop didn't break. So I'm a loop guy. I'm lazy. I like to be able to change. I like to be able to change leaders. I like to be able to put a poly leader on the end. So
yeah, same.
I'm a loop guy. If you had to choose one line fish for streamers, for smallmouth and trout, would you recommend a cold water or warm water? Ryan, I would still recommend a cold water because your smallmouth waters get warm, but they don't get tropical warm. So I would just go with a standard cold water, standard line, not a warm water specific line. Because what happens when you fish one of those warm water lines and say your water temperature gets down to 55 or something like that, it's going to have a lot of kinks in it that won't come out because it's stiffer. It's a stiffer line. So I would stick with the standard cold water line for that. Yep. Do you ever weld your own fly line loops? No. I don't. I trust the loops that they put on at the factory.
I like this question. What color fly line is your favorite, and does color matter much? I've always kind of wondered about the colors of the line and the intention behind that. Do you have any ideas on that, Tom?
What do you think? I've been doing all the talking.
I know. Well, I was just cute. When I first started fishing, I was like, why are lines always the same color? Like, I would love to have like a bright pink or something, or a purple line, which I've actually seen before, but it's very rare. So I was just curious, like, why is that? I would love to have a brighter line, or does that kind of spook the fish at all?
Well, you can get, there's a line, I think Cortland makes it. There's a line that's bright fire engine red, hot red or hot orange. They're used for photography a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think fly line color matters at all because you shouldn't be false casting over a fish.
Yeah.
And your fly line should not land near a fish. And it doesn't matter if your line is camo or invisible. It has weight. And when that line hits the water, you take the chance of spooking a fish.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, I don't think it matters. I know that guides in New Zealand just have to have muted gray or camouflage lines.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you shouldn't be throwing your fly line in the vicinity of a fish. That's what a leader's for. So so I don't have a favorite color. I use yellow usually because that's what they come, yellow or olive, whatever they come in.
Yep.
If we're doing photography, if we're doing videography with Pete on a casting video or something, we like to use those bright orange lines.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't think color matters.
I like that. I'm gonna look for a bright line now.
Yeah. I mean, the bright yellow lines are pretty common, but I don't think And when you can see your line, it helps a lot. Helps a lot in your casting. Helps a lot, with your back cast, making sure you're not getting into the trees, following the progress of your fly.
Yeah. Do you have any creative ideas or recommendations for recycling your old line, or what have you done with that?
Yeah, there is a company called Flyvines,
Mm.
and Flyvines makes bracelets and lanyards and dog collars out of recycled fly lines.
Huh.
I believe that all the scraps from scientific anglers go there, but yeah. Google Flyvines, and they'll take your old lines and recycle them and make cool stuff out of them.
It's cool. I wish I was crafty, but then I just feel bad because I'm not. So I don't know what else to do with all of them.
The other thing to do with old fly lines is to practice knot tying. They're really good for practicing knot tying. You know, if you have a class or something. Oh, you know, we haven't talked about smooth or textured lines.
Oh, yeah. What's the difference?
One's smooth, one's textured.
I knew you were going to say that.
So, talk about textured lines first. Textured lines have a kind of a like a pebble finish on them. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Orvis Pro line has a very aggressive, almost like a shark skin in the middle of the line. And then toward the end, it has it has a very aggressive texture right at the tip. And then as it gets into the area where you handle the line, it's a little bit less aggressive texture. And texture works like the dimples on a golf ball. It actually helps the line cast a little bit better. And it shoots because it acts like a ball bearing. Your guides, they shoot a little bit better. You can get a little bit of extra distance, and they float better because of the increased surface area that the texture gives them. Mm-hmm. Now, they're also noisy in the guides. They sometimes squeak when you're playing a fish or reeling a fish in, or and some people say they abrade their fingers. I've never had that problem, but they're only textured toward the tip. But some people just don't like the sound of the textured lines, and so you can get smooth lines as well. But performance, you get a little bit of edge with a textured line, but you know, if you don't like it, get a smooth line. The pro lines, the top of the line Orvis lines, come in both smooth and textured. Really personal preference.
Yeah. Cool.
Purple fly lines. Yeah. You and Irma. Yep. You and Irma want a purple line. Well, that would go with Cheech's fly tying vise from Fly Fish Food, because he's got that purple fly tying vise. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
It's easy. It's easy to put a dye into a fly line. Or not easy, but it can be done.
Cool.
All right. I don't see any other questions. We got any other questions here? Can't believe we answered everybody's questions. Oh, here's one I missed. When do you decide to use a floating line with sinking lead over a full sinking line? Yeah, good question, Mike. If I'm in a trout stream and I suddenly want to fish a deep, fast run with a streamer and I can't get it down with the floating line, and I want to retrieve it through that fast water, I'll put on a poly leader, and usually that'll do it. To get deeper, I can put a heavier streamer on, or I can cast more upstream and bend to get it down. But if you were fishing in a lake or in salt water or in a very large pool in a river, very large river, where you want that fly to ride at depth for a long distance, like almost to your feet, that's when you would go with a sinking line. So I don't think I have ever used a full sinking line in a trout stream. However, I've used them a lot in trout lakes, and I've used them for bass and pike in lakes, and I've used them a lot in saltwater. So, but I think I can't remember a time when I've ever thought I needed a full sinking fly line in a trout river. Ed wants to know, would you recommend a power taper for saltwater? I like them, Ed. I like them for bigger fish and bigger flies. I wouldn't use one for bonefish or permit. Well, maybe for permit. I wouldn't use one for bonefish or really spooky redfish, because I like a little more delicacy for those species. But for snook and more offshore fishing or fishing from a boat, I like a power taper. How much further to wade forward cast over double taper lines? You can probably get, I don't know, on the average, Jay, maybe 10 to 15 feet farther with a wade forward, because you're able to shoot more line easier. It depends on the caster and whether there's a wind and what kind of fly you got on the end, but maybe 10% to 15% farther with a wade forward at distance.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What chemicals destroy fly lines? Jay, I'm not sure. I would just keep chemicals off your fly line. I'm not sure about suntan lotion. I do know about insect repellent with DEET is dangerous. Anything with a solvent in it is going to be dangerous around a fly line. So could ruin the finish.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to determine fly line weight when you don't have the box? No, there used to be, Roger. Used to be able to take a micrometer to the belly, and it would tell you. But lines have such a range of densities and tapers now that it's nearly impossible. The best way to do it is to take it to a fly shop and either compare it to some lines or put it on a couple rods and cast it. Most modern lines have the designation inked onto the tip. Usually a foot or two back from the tip, that tells you, which has been a great, that line idea has been a great boon to people like me who have a bunch of lines laying around. But I don't know of a good way, Roger, of determining what weight it is. Oh, we already answered that question. We miss any, Erica, that you saw?
I'm not seeing any that we missed. Seems like we covered quite a lot. I learned a lot.
Joe, the best way to clean a fly line is, you must have come in late, is warm water and soap, run it through a paper towel or a soft cloth. So Orvis make a clear intermediate. I need to replace mine, but can't find a manufacturer. Can you recommend? No, Mike. I can't. Sorry, I don't know offhand of one. I'm sure they're out there, but I'm certainly not going to help you find a non-Orvis fly line somewhere. I do still work for Orvis, What do you think of triangle taper? I haven't fished one in a long time, Mike, but it's just a different kind of taper. They seem to be fine. How often do you zip juice your line? How about never? Zip juice is a product that
Mm.
is used to clean lines.
Oh.
I think it's just soap or something.
Hmm.
I don't know. Soap and water, Ralph. Soap and water.
Cool.
Any other questions? I know fly lines are confusing. I know you got questions.
Hmm.
I'm still trying to don't ask me any questions about two-handed lines. I'm still trying to figure that out.
That's a whole another world that
Yeah, we got to get an expert on for that.
Yeah.
I still have to ask the product developers. So
Yeah.
when I go two-handed fishing, just tell me what line I need.
Are there any tests that Orvis is working on as far as like maybe innovative lines that might be coming, or what? Like any product testing that's going on?
Always.
Any
And we're
sneak
not.
peeks?
I can tell you personally, but I can't tell anybody else. We're always working on new rods, reels, lines, leaders, tippet. Always. We're always trying to improve. I know there's a few lines that I'd like to see. Advantage of clear line over colored. Is there any? There may be, Mike. There may be. I use a floating saltwater line with a clear tip, and I think it makes a difference because it's more like a leader, but still lands as hard as a fly line. I know guides hate clear lines because they can't estimate where the client's fly is.
Hmm.
So guides don't care for them. They've never caught on. They've never caught on that much. I mean, they're made and people use them, but they've never become super popular. Do rod ratings and line weights really matter anymore? Yeah, they still matter, Dave. They're a little looser than they used to be, but they still matter. There's still a difference between a 5-weight and a 7-weight, and a 5-weight and a 3-weight. And the rods and the lines are still in the ballpark. They're just the lines have blurred a little bit more than they may have in the past, particularly with things like bamboo and fiberglass, which weren't able to handle a lighter or heavier line very well. But with graphite rods, the lines have blurred a bit.
Does Euro nymphing require different lines or just leaders?
Well, if you are seriously Euro nymphing, you probably need either a super long leader or you need a Euro nymphing line, because lines sag. Once you get that line out of the tip of the rod, the line will sag because it's got weight, and you can't get a straight line to those nymphs that are bumping on the bottom, and you lose control. You aren't able to detect strikes, and the line, when it sags, is going to pull your fly out of the lane of drift. So that's why that people have either specialized Euro lines, which they're basically like a level 1-weight or 0-weight or running line, or they just use super long leaders, and the fly line never comes outside the tip of the rod. So yeah, you do need something to do it effectively, efficiently. You can Euro nymph with a standard leader and a standard 5-weight line, but it's not going to work that well.
I see.
Does standing on your line damage it? Like when you're bank angling, you forget not to adjust your feet. Yeah, it can, Mike, especially if you have metal studs in your boots. But yeah, I mean, if you're grinding that fly line into stones and gravel, you are going to eventually wear the coating on the line. So yeah, you do have to be careful when you're stripping on gravel. And another thing is casting on grass is not really good for a fly line. Wet grass is better. So if you're going to cast on grass, maybe you can wet it down with a hose or something like that first, because grass is fairly abrasive, and that can hurt a fly line.
Mm.
And of course, obviously, casting on asphalt is not good for a fly line.
Yeah.
Angie had to go to the doctor's office and miss something. Yeah, Angie, these are always recorded, and they'll be on YouTube and on the Orvis Facebook page. So you can always watch us in the reruns if you want.
Great.
All right. Well, we are getting to an hour, and I can see people dropping like flies. So, and I think we've run out of questions. So want to thank you all for coming. Thanks for your great questions.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific questions. Erica, you talk too much this week.
I know, right? I'm soaking it all in. Told you this would be the shortest episode if I took over this one.
Well, we'll do one on guides and guiding, and then you can do all the talking. How's that?
Oh, great. Well, yeah, those were good questions. I learned a ton. So thank you, everyone. And thanks, Tom.
Thank you all. And we will see you in about a month, I think. Once a month, we'll do these awkward and clueless segments. And again, thank you all for coming. It means a lot to us that, hundreds of people listen to us jabber on about fly lines. So we appreciate that.
Yep.
Oh, and Monday is a tie-off with Tim Flagler. Next Monday. We're tying a mouse rat too, which is a tough one. So should be interesting.
All right.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. We will see you soon.
See ya.